everybody. It's Jennifer, Tom, and Adam, and we're here to give you this week's updates on the Office 365 roadmap, or the Microsoft 365 roadmap. I think it's always interesting because things seem to ebb and flow. And last week, Tom and I had a pretty quick show because
it was a really ebb week.
There just weren't many updates, but this week there's a lot of updates. So again, we're happy to have the Office 365 Pulse here to let you know what changes are happening and kind of deliver and push out some more information. And so, Tom, I think you have the first change for us today. So why don't you go ahead and walk us through that?
Sure. So one of the things that's hit the roadmap for rolling out is that Outlook on the web, third-party storage services. I think this is interesting in the fact that they're going to start allowing admins the ability to have their users connect to third-party storage systems. On one hand, I think that's really cool. You can interface with Box and Dropbox and all these other things. On the flip side, that is a really, really big security risk there. So I'll be interested to see how well that's controllable and what they need to do to make sure that people don't do that in environments where you really don't want people going to third-party solutions. Because people are going to do it.
They'll close it out. I have a feeling they'll give you a toggle switch that lets you determine where you can go and where you can't go. So that one's an interesting one. So
yeah, I'll give props to Microsoft too. I like seeing the trend of them being open to integrating other solutions. Like, we all remember, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in like SharePoint 2007 era, it was you must do everything here and it's the greatest thing ever, even the stuff it didn't do well. And as a whole, I really like the trend of them being open to, hey, look, not everyone's going to use OneDrive, not everyone's going to use SharePoint, but let's make it easier for them to bring in the tools they are using, because long term, that puts them in a better position. So
it does.
Little applause to them for at least considering that. I agree with Tom. We'll see how they implement it, what security things are there, but I appreciate that they're continuing to develop in this mold that you see with Teams and Flow and things like that.
Yeah.
Very cool.
The next one is a pretty simple one, but exciting. I love it when the government cloud gets to be feature parity with the enterprise cloud. So we're making strides in that direction, but Microsoft Stream has been deployed to the government community cloud. So that is a good one there. That should be launched. So if you're in the government cloud, you should be seeing that now. If you don't, work with your site administrators and your site owners, tenant owners, to find out how you can take advantage of those features. So that is that's a new one that is rolled out. Great announcement there. So how about take us to the next one, Adam?
Sure. So the next one's really straightforward. There's a couple things in a row that makes my Exchange person happy. One really simple one, they're now giving the ability in PowerShell for if you go into Exchange Online through PowerShell, you can basically change the group's email address, which this was an involved process of going through and trying to get it changed in the past, the options they had in the GUI. Simple PowerShell command makes that nice. It also makes it the big thing that I see as a value here, they've put in some Azure AD Premium functionality around naming conventions for groups, but that only impacted groups that you created from that point on. So I think specifically for some of the older customers that maybe already had some group scrawl going on, already had some original stuff created, this now gives you a programmatical scripting way to go in and perhaps change the naming convention, or at least change the email address convention of some of your groups, which can kind of bring in line to a better governance policy is really where I see this being pretty cool.
Yeah, most definitely. Tom, I think the next one, did you have some thoughts on the conditional access?
I don't think I did, but I think it's important. I think it might have been Adam.
Yeah, so this is a typical security one, and we were talking about this before we got on to record. So what they basically announced, and they kind of like slipped this one in. It's a really, really small update. I'm going to read this word for word because I read this and my eyes kind of bugged out a little bit. It says, Office 365 admins can now set policies that block users from downloading files from Outlook of the web to non-compliant devices. And my first thought is, wait, you could download files on non-compliant devices from OWA? So the fact that they're putting this in is good. There's been a lot of development over conditional access and integration with Intune. When you hear that non-compliant devices, that's MDM, that's Intune, that's what they're talking about. But the fact that you could do this previously, I was not aware of, and I'm someone who's done multiple Intune deployments. So this is kind of like, oh, that's nice they're adding it. That's also a crazy flaw they had previously. So that was both rolling out and launched all in one update. So nice to see that that's now there.
That's awesome. All right, cool. And then the next one was calendar updates. So like the automatic processing of small changes in meeting details, this is starting to roll out. This is great. This means when someone makes a small change to a meeting, instead of everyone in the meeting having to get another invite, it's like, hey, let's highlight the fact that Jennifer made a mistake and has to change something small, and everyone gets to re-accept her meeting. They're now not going to do that. And so that's going to be something that you can customize the logic and figure out at what point do I do this or not. Resend it out, but I think that is a great one. So if it doesn't affect the date, time, reoccurrence patterns, or anything like that, it's going to update the meeting invite for everybody, but not send out another email to make them say, hey, you have to, re-accept this meeting. And then half the time I look at that and I'm like, well, what actually changed? And I can't find it. So I'm excited about that change coming out for sure. Yeah. And that's rolling out. So I always like to remind everybody that rolling out means if you're a first release tenant, you're going to start to see it. So depending on where you're at in the release cycle, when it's rolling out, that means it's starting to drop to the first release tenants. When it says launch, that means the rollout has completed and that it should be available in your tenant. And when it says envelopment, it means they're working on it, but it hasn't hit any of the testing rings or anything like that yet.
Yeah,
all right.
The only thing that I want to point on in the Outlook calendar one that we just discussed is that, if like somebody goes in and changes the agenda or changes an attachment or something like that, this can auto-process for you, which is great, except if you're not of the mindset that says, hey, before I go to this meeting, I need to go out and check my calendar invite to make sure I've got everything. You may find that there's stuff out there that when you first looked at it wasn't there, and then when you go into the meeting, people are like, okay, so everybody read the file attachment, right? And you're like, what file attachment? So you're going to have to, kind of be aware of the fact that on some of these things, if they're changing the body of the invite, you may not get any warning that they've done that, and you may not be completely prepared for a meeting.
That's a very good point. I think that's a education piece. I tend to look at the meetings right before I go or a day or so ahead of time and kind of plan for it and see. So that's definitely a good point. So, really have to understand how are your users working and how could this impact them. But again, it is customizable, so organizations can hopefully go in and figure out and say, this is what I want to trigger it and this is what I don't. But really good feedback there.
I think this is telling of our own use, because I immediately thought of Jen. I was like, oh, when I fat finger and type something wrong, now everyone doesn't know my mistakes. And so I was like, let's look at this from a governance and organizational standpoint. I'm like, woo, people won't know I'm an idiot.
No, they just won't get reminders of it.
Sure, fair.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. I think the next one was you, Tom, right? I keep feeling like I'm stealing yours.
No, the Find Time, I think, was ones you were going to mention because you've kind of looked at Find Time a little bit more than I have.
Oh, but what about I'll do the Find Time, and then if you want to do the file libraries with metadata.
Oh, I missed that one. I scrolled and it just kind of went, bloop. Okay, let me do the file handling thing.
Perfect.
One thing that, if you've got an older version of SharePoint, if you uploaded a file to a document library and there was required metadata, what would happen is if you didn't fill in the metadata right away, when you upload the document is there, but it's also checked out. And since there's no initial version yet, nobody could see that it exists, which is kind of a dangerous thing. Really used to bug, or it still does bug me because we're not quite there yet. But what they're doing now is this, like the file will no longer be checked out automatically to the user who created it at the point that the metadata needs to be entered. So everybody will see that the file is out there. Now, the metadata that's associated with it may not show up yet. Person may still be working on it, or they may have to go back in and fix it, but at least everybody knows it's there. And that, from a support standpoint of people going, Bob can see the file, I can't see the file, where's the file, what happened, I'm lost, I don't have permissions,
I feel like you've heard these complaints before, Tom.
Only a couple times in the last hour.
The last hour, nice.
No, but it's one of those things that I like the fact that there's more transparency, that something is out there, because that whole, there's no checked-in version. It's like everything is invisible, and I even forget to go out and check, hey, let's go check the file settings or the library settings to see if there's versions that have not been checked in yet.
Yeah.
So I really like that idea.
Yeah, this is a really great change. I was so excited when they announced it, and I'm super happy that it's now completely launched and out there. So the Find Time one was the next one, and so
okay.
Find Time, this is it's kind of a bunch of them bundled together, and I'll call them usability changes to Find Time to make it a little bit easier to use. So the first one is you can actually delete a user out of Find Time and all of their data. So if you've added somebody needs to be deleted, we can go ahead and do that so it doesn't clog it up, and maybe somebody doesn't need to be in the meeting anymore. You don't need to find time with them. Also, reminders for people automatically. So it's going to automatically remind me to complete the Find Time poll if I haven't done it yet, which sometimes, let's be honest, I get email, and if I don't happen to deal with it right then, I can tend to forget it, so I'm excited about that. And then the last one is an automatic deletion of polls that are 90 days old and not resolved. So I think those are all just good usability changes that are coming, and those are all, they went from rolling out to launch this week. So I think the best way to say it is a couple of just quick and easy Find Time usability changes that I'm guessing if you're a big Find Time user, that those are just going to be very welcome changes for you.
Yeah. And if you don't know what Find Time is, it's a wonderful little way to schedule meetings that comes in the newer versions of Outlook. It was originally developed off of an add-in that Microsoft developed themselves. But if you have the newer version of Outlook and you haven't had it and you have trouble finding free time for people, check it out and seeing these updates all come out at once. Clearly they're giving some TLC to it, which is nice to see, and something that you would expect to be a part of the Outlook experience for some time to come.
Well, and it also plays into what you had mentioned a number of shows ago, Adam, where it's like the focus on making tiny incremental changes is there. And those are the things that are encouraging, because you just don't go for 6 months, a year, and nothing changes, and then boom, you get hit with an avalanche of stuff. These little things that say, hey, we know this is a pain point, may not be major, but we're going to address it. That's always a cool thing.
Yeah.
Most definitely. All right, Adam, you're up next with Azure AD password protection.
Yeah, so more nerdy security stuff for me that gets me excited for whatever reason. So I do a lot of security and, compliance things, and it's been more prevalent as I've switched jobs recently. Well, moderately recently, I guess we should say. But going through and looking at it, they're coming out with a new thing that just makes sense, that's nice to see. So this is available through Azure AD, as you see a lot of the newer things that come out. So if you're an Office 365 user, you're going to have to venture into the scary Azure portal to find this. But basically they're coming out with a thing that they're calling Azure AD Password Protection, and all it really is from a high level is a database of 500 really commonly used words for passwords, and then a ton, they say over 1 million character changes to those that you can kind of see. So what this is really doing is if there's stuff that your users probably shouldn't be doing, like, I don't know, using password for their password, then your users can't use password for their password, or, password with an @ sign for the A and a 1 at the end and things like that. So what this is really doing is the commonly guessed passwords that if someone's just trying to brute force into some of your users, they'll go in and just spam out a whole bunch of really common passwords. This will really help to significantly eliminate that. And what it's going to do is detect if your users are trying to save that in and not allow them to, which I think is great. And every time that I see something like this, I think of the Spaceballs scene where the guy's giving the password to Druidia and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the commander of the Spaceballs is like, that's the password to my luggage. So it's not going to be the password to his luggage, which is hopefully a good thing.
Oh,
That's awesome.
I don't know how to follow that one, actually, but I'll go ahead and try. Next one on the list is something that's very simple. There's not a lot of explanation to it, but it's a location column in SharePoint lists. And so with more and more emphasis being put on, being able to do maps and geographic locations and stuff like that, GIS type information, they now have a dynamic list and library column that can include that information. So addresses, maps, geographic locations, and I think that will help to add some interesting context to some of your lists and libraries out there where perhaps you put an address out there and then you end up calculating a map that you can see there or something like that. Again, it's not going to be applicable to every single list that you do, but it's nice to be able to have that without having to go through and do some convoluted web service call, calculated column stuff to get that type of appearance. Now it's going to be happening a lot more automatically.
Awesome. All right, you're up next with PowerPoint, Adam.
Why don't you go ahead and take this one, Jen?
All right, so PowerPoint, this is going to be one where you're going to be able to get live captions and subtitles in PowerPoint. So if you're doing a presentation, as you're doing it, it's going to show up in real time on the screen inside of your live presentation. So that's a really cool thing that is rolling out. You're going to get up to 10 input spoken languages and 60 plus translated languages on the screen. I think we're going to try this in a meeting we do at maybe our next meeting. We'll pick a language and see what the subtitles look like. But so that's rolling out, and it should be hitting everybody's tenants pretty soon.
I love the concept of this, right? Like, you're doing a meeting with Japan, and you can just be going on and doing your thing, and they can not only have subtitles in Japanese, but if that's one of the 10 languages, they could actually have real-time audio translation. This is the type of stuff that we saw on Stream. Tom's talked to Deacon about this, but seeing them expand that out using Cortana and some of the AI stuff in there to some of their other suites that actually will impact people day to day. This is the nerdy stuff that gets me excited because, this blows, I couldn't imagine this being a thing 10 years ago. And seeing some of that stuff come to, the tools that we use every day, like PowerPoint presentations, is really pretty cool.
And from a business and comic standpoint, I go immediately to the fact of Adam doing this great presentation, makes his final closing point, looks at all the other attendees, and they're all sitting there with their jaws open because he just committed a huge cultural faux pas based on how the interpretation was done.
That would probably happen, let's be real.
Well, I think with all things you do it within guidelines and looking at what you're doing, but a lot of foreign language speakers that I've worked with, they can hear, but then being able to even read the subtitles or something like that in their own native language is a better experience for them. So I think
languages is a lot.
Definitely.
That's pretty cool.
Most definitely. And we've been seeing this a lot at conferences and stuff like that. If you're at the Microsoft events, they've been using a lot of these technologies for a while now. So now getting it into our own hands is actually a pretty cool experience there. So Adam, why don't you move us along with message encryption and customizable templates?
This is one of the things that's kind of niche, but I think it's pretty cool when you go through and look at what it does. So for a long time, if you're doing Office message encryption, you've been able to go through and have a default template that's given out to people when you're going through and doing it, telling them about you're sending them an encrypted message and what their instructions should be and stuff like that. What they're really doing now is they're working on developing where you can have multiple templates that you apply based on, conditions that are met. So you can say, oh, well, if this person is in this department, do this one template. If this person is in this department, do another. And I think that's really cool. So if you have someone sending off an email in finance, they may have different reasons for needing to send a message encryption than someone who's sending it out from legal. And before, you just had to have this generic boilerplate statement that went out with the message, or the generic one Microsoft had. And what they're now doing is basically going through and giving you customizable templates that you can create that say, when these conditions are met about the email, put in this template. So I don't think a ton of people will necessarily use this, but the people that actually care about encryption, this is a pretty significant step up and customizable nature of what you're doing and really usability. Because like I said, if you have multiple reasons to do it, you kind of have to go with the boilerplate catch-all function, and now I can really customize it down. You can even do stuff like, okay, well, I'm required to send encrypted emails when I'm dealing with Bank of America for this contract, so I can have something that explicitly talks about that and explicitly addresses Bank of America to see that condition being met. So again, I don't think this will be the biggest audience, but I like to see this change and this customization coming to really make it more usable for people that need that functionality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the next one is for Outlook on the web. If you have got Teams enabled, then when you create a new meeting, it is going to automatically default it to a Teams meeting. And this is different than, before if it was using Skype. And so I think what's important to know about this one is just understanding. Your help desk might get some calls if it's like all of a sudden, well, I used to get a Skype meeting, but now I get a Teams meeting and I'm confused. So I think that one is a new one to kind of be aware about, or hey, how come it doesn't work in the client the same way it works on the web? And so different things there. But it's actually a good thing, and I'm kind of excited to see that. We've converted all of our meetings now are running on Team meetings instead of Skype meetings, so I'm definitely in Teams way more than I am in Skype now, and so I'm happy to kind of start seeing some of those defaults change.
Natural progression, too, of the fact that Teams is taking over everything that Skype was. Skype kind of got rolled in. And, I mean, that's obviously Microsoft is investing in it, so this is a change that you knew was going to be coming over time. I think this is just further cementing Teams as the go-to application and product for this type of thing.
Most definitely.
Microsoft Stream intelligence capabilities. This is one I think we've talked about in the past, but it hit the map again, and this time I think it's, under launched? Yes, launched.
Yes, it should be done.
Yeah, and so the great thing about this is that when I started using Microsoft Streams, there were a whole lot of features that I'm like, wow, I can't wait to use those, only to find out that they were stuck up at the E5 level. It's like, no, you don't get to search on the transcript, you don't get that people view, you don't get this, you don't get that. Too bad. Now, basically, they've taken what I consider the really important things that are out there for a video that get generated automatically, and they've taken that all the way down to the E1 level, E3, first line education.
Even the business stuff.
The whole bit, yeah. So all of a sudden, you now have a really powerful business video streaming platform that does facial recognition, does transcription, does searchable transcripts, does closed captioning. And I know that I've always told people it's like, Stream is like YouTube for Office 365. Now it's like YouTube on steroids in Office 365. So good thing it's out there now, and if you're just getting into Stream, you're going to see a whole lot of functionality that some of us had to wait a while to get to this point on.
And combine that with Jen's earlier update with Stream now being in the GCC just in time for them to get all these premium features. So it works out pretty well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the future of Stream and how it's going to be integrated with the other products to really complete some great business scenarios. So I'm super excited about that.
Because they've talked about some integration with like Planner and Forms for doing real-time polls, and I'm like, whoa, okay. And plus, I think we talked about this last week or the week before, where they're now looking at Streams of being able to say, hey, you can now record a stream video on your phone and upload it from the mobile app, which is like, wow, that's rather cool. So
yeah, Stream is definitely going to be one of the ones to watch over the next year or so. As we see some of those changes come in. So super excited about that. We have another announcement for GCC and GCC High. Very excited to say that Microsoft Planner has been launched. So now look at this. We've got Stream, we've got Planner, and we've got Teams. So I'm kind of excited about everything that's finally making its way to the government tenants. And so that is in a launch state. So again, you should be able to start to see that hitting up there. And then I think we have one more update. So Adam, why don't you close us out today with our last big update from the day.
Yeah, so I thought this one was cool. This is one that kind of impacts all of us equally. If you have a larger organization, they now announce basically that they have launched multi-geolocationing and SharePoint in groups. So basically, if you have a tenant that, you have some users in the US, some users in the UK, some users in Japan, no longer do you have to house all of that data in one location when you're talking about SharePoint in groups. And I think that's really cool when you go through to look at it. Specifically, I think this brings them really up to speed with competition when you're looking at data residency and compliance issues. So specifically, if you're an organization like Mercedes or something, right, that has their headquarters in Germany but has US residents, it has, I'm sure, UK residents, and people all over the world, well, there's very different data residency and access laws in the UK than there is in Germany than there is in the US. And before, they would have had to do separate tenants in each system, which, if any of you guys have ever tried to do collaboration between separate tenants, it's not the best experience. Now they can do one centralized tenant that has focused geographical area for certain sites, for certain groups. So as long as you're putting, okay, all the German employees are going to be in this group, and that means the data is going to be housed there, that makes it really, really powerful, and specifically makes the collaboration inside of that company significantly better, because you don't have to go through the hurdles of ensuring your data is in the right location. With this geo-residency stuff that you can do now that it's launched to SharePoint and groups, you can really do that internally with one tenant, which I think is awesome.
Well, and I think that kind of bodes well too, and correct me if this is not the case, but let's say that, I'm in part of a US firm that's acquired by a UK firm or vice versa. Now all of a sudden, I think when I first got involved with this, it's like, nope, you are a US tenant and you shall forever remain a US tenant. Well, now it sounds like you can start to push some of that workload off to another geolocation for your tenant, and possibly, I would assume, migrate over time to get all your stuff over in the UK if that's where it makes more sense to have it.
Well, the really nice thing when you go through and you look at how geo-residency works and multi-geo deployments and SharePoint and groups work is it's done by the specific location or grouping of files. And so how this could really work, say we're, in your example, we're a US firm and we get bought by the UK, so then we immediately have to have some data we're putting in the UK. You basically specify that all files put in the SharePoint library are housed in the UK. So at that time, you'd still technically be a US tenant, so you'd still, like, your users would still be in the US, they'd be accessing US systems, but all the data that's being handled that is required to be in the UK or in Germany or wherever, you can basically assure through this geo-residency stuff that it's going where you need. And so if you wanted, by all means, you could slowly over time start migrating all your stuff into a document library in the same tenant that just has that geolocation turned on. So it really does bring that flexibility that you can rest assured, okay, well, I by law have to keep this in the UK, but I'm worried about that now, because you don't have to worry about that. Microsoft takes care of that on the back end for you. You just set the setting, even though I'm in the US, I'm following all the laws and following the access parameters around requiring it to be housed in the UK, which is cool.
Cool.
All right, guys. Well, this has been another fantastic weekly show. So I feel like we had a lot of really great updates this week. I am looking forward to next week, where we'll be back after we figure out what they're going to have next week. Who knows if it'll be a big week or a small week.
Two updates.
Two updates, yeah.
But this week was a pretty good update with a lot of rich content. So
we had 74 updates to choose from.
Whoa!
I know. Well, we saw, or hopefully you guys are really enjoying the show. It's a quick and easy way to get a nice condensed view of the Office 365 roadmap. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye, guys.